Hey guys, today I'm just going to run you through a project that I did in Grease Pencil while trying to learn how Vertex Paint worked. And basically, it's a Rick and Morty animation that I wanted to make a really trippy background for in Blender's Grease Pencil. So this is how that went. I started off with a rough animation like the one you're seeing right now, and turned it from an animatic into the animation itself, colored fully in Grease Pencil as well. And once I was satisfied with how the animation looked to a certain extent, I went straight in and started to create a background. For the background, there were several choices of the type of trippy psychedelicness that I could have gone with. I tried to make something that could relate to patterns because it'll be a little bit more fluid, a little organic looking patterns instead of making them geometry, because that would require a lot more fine lines and stuff, and I wanted to make something that was fluid and organic and almost like morphing in the background. So that's what Morty is kind of tripping through here. So what I ended up doing was drawing a couple of amorphous blobby shapes in the background, and using that first frame I then gave it a direction and started to morph everything that way. And towards the end of morphing, I kind of wanted everything to whirlpool into the center and then suck inwards, like almost like it's a black hole sort of disappearing, so it could transition into the next background type that I wanted to showcase. So that's what I am doing here, sort of tearing in the fabric of this pattern into itself, so it's collapsing in on itself almost, and everything sort of disappeared into the center like you were twirling some cloth. Maybe that was the kind of effect I was going for, and it ended up working pretty well. It looked convincingly like it was disappearing. So next I colored in each of those lines with just block colors. To do this, I switched to Vertex Paint instead of materials, and using one fill material, I just created an entire palette with all the colors that I wanted to drop, and then it looks a little disorienting, the whole process right now, because I just had to keep referring to the previous frame to remember where the colors were, as onion skinning did not work here because onion skin does not show the shade of the color, so it became really difficult for me to figure out what color moved where when everything was morphing around. But in the end we got there, we persisted, and got all the colors laid out for that sort of swirly animation thing. So this is what it looked like to create the palette. Up here is where I went and I named it, because I had several other palettes for the rest of the color schemes that I needed for this project. So if you want to know more about how to make this, we have a video out on how to use Vertex Paint and its properties in Grease Pencil. So I suggest you go watch that to get a good idea of how the details of this work. But this is essentially what I did for this project. And once all this was done and I finished dropping in all these colors and everything, we moved into the second background. This I struggled with a little bit at the beginning, so I dropped in a solid background and I messed around with the colors to try and see what might be a good transition. And in the end I went with a gradient sort of situation, and to do that I needed to color in the background manually because Vertex Paint does not work on fill areas, so I couldn't use the quick shortcut of filling the space. So you get the idea, I just had to scribble it all in, and once that was done, you see me making the palette that I was going to use for the gradient background, and those are the colors I settled on in the end. And then I used the airbrush tool to lay down all the colors. I tried to keep it a little bit like a galaxy background, sort of bleeding into each other with some greens, purples, and very cool colors. And essentially all I did was lay them down first and then drag them across the screen in small increments. I also, once everything was done, added two effects to the gradient layer. One of those was a blur effect. I increased it a little so that the colors could blend in and merge and bleed into each other a little bit more than they were doing already, so it kind of looked a little stiff. And once I was done with messing around with that, I added a wave distortion, made it horizontal, and just played around with the features given there, the options, until I felt like I'd reached the effect that I wanted to. Once I was done, this is what the final animation looked like. I added some lights because grease pencil objects now interact with lights as well. For the garage area, I used my garage palette to fill in all the objects for that layer. And this is essentially how I created a trippy animated background in Blender. Like and subscribe if you want to see more of our videos, and as always, I'm going to prompt you to join our Discord because we have a really great community of artists and animators there, and we would love to see you there as well. Thanks, see you guys in the next video.